Steve, I don't have I don't have really anything exciting to tell you, but hi, Steve. How are you?
Good. How you?
Good. I'm great. I'm great because we just had a wonderful conversation with Rob Biertempfel of The Athletic, who covers the Pittsburgh Pirates. That will be the gist of today's show, but we do have some Penn State topics to get to. But first, we have to say what the name of the show is, which is the Stuff Summer Says podcast with
Steve.
Steve. We're going to talk about some news that you might have heard of related to Penn State basketball. We'll talk about that. We will talk very quickly probably about Penn State hockey, and then I think we might also redirect something into that Penn State basketball conversation. Anything else? Okay,
No, I can't wait. Sounds like you're baking and spicing something up all together. I can't wait for this jambalaya to come out. This is great.
And maybe, just maybe, we will have a video this week. I think I figured out how to do it.
I'm glad I guessed for it.
Steve, yeah,
Good
Steve.
Lord, shit, Jesus.
You look great, Steve. Steve
Yeah.
paid. I gave Steve a whole $0 on his hair and makeup,
and he spent
budget.
it all.
Yeah, he did.
All in the same place.
Hey, you know what? When you bought that sweatshirt, it was probably like 20 cents. So that's
back in the day. It's
back
old.
in the day.
Well, it's not older than you, but it's old.
I was gonna say it's pretty old. Anyway, speaking of something that's old by now that you're listening to it, Penn State doesn't have a basketball coach right now, so that's fun. I don't know where to begin. I am generally surprised that Micah Shrewsberry left. I think it boiled down to two things. I think number one, the gravity of going home was big for him. I think that played, maybe was 55%, and I think 45% was the NIL stuff. And I wrote about that on the blog, which is a shameless plug that you can go check out. But I ultimately think that is where this whole thing broke down. And it reared its ugly head kind of right at this time when it is going to reset the basketball program, point blank, for what it is. Now, spinning it forward a little bit, I do think the groundwork is now there for you to be able to succeed at Penn State, and do it very quickly. Like, I think that has been what we've seen. It took Micah Shrewsberry 2 years, and I think the big reason why is this current environment of transfers is coming in. You look at a Jalen Pickett, you look at some of the other guys on the roster this year that were key guys, and I think that ultimately really changed this program for the better. To me, I don't know. I think I need to see how this all plays out. I think it's frustrating from my standpoint because I think there's never been a time where more average Joes have cared about Penn State sports, or Penn State basketball than ever. And it went from exciting to angry, but in my mind, at least it's not apathy, if that makes sense. And I think that was what we had for the last 9 or 10 years, or so. So that's about where I'm at on it. It seems like Mike Rhoades is the leading candidate. I'm not a basketball mind by any means. I just like watching basketball. If they have more points than the other team, that's great. And I know that means it's a good thing. That being said, some people seem a little disappointed with him. I don't know. I don't think there's anybody that Pat Kraft can go get that can kind of bring up your spirits as much as Micah Shrewsberry had your spirits up for.
I think that's a good summary. I don't think anybody's going to come in and be perceived as an immediate upgrade. I just don't know who that person would be, but whoever the person is has a challenge to do it in 2 years, right? I mean, because that bar has been set, and that's serious. That means that the job comes with expectations, which I'm not sure it has in the past. It was like, oh, here's the next guy. Oh, we're going to do this, and this is the process. A couple of years, got to get his guys. The whole transfer, NIL, all that stuff has changed the game. Penn State should be able to compete in that way. And apparently, I mean, I do believe it was a going home thing for Shrewsberry from all that's come out, and that's great. But financially, it sounds like Penn State was willing to make a comparable investment, right? Something that was worth thinking about hard. So they're going to invest in the next coach, you would think. So yeah, I don't know that there's anybody out there. I think the Texas guy was never coming here. I mean, I was intrigued that, his name was in the mix, but he's been an assistant at Texas forever. Yeah. He's going to get that gig. I don't know if it'll be Rhoades or who it is, but whoever it is needs to be probably sooner rather than later. to try to re-recruit who's here and get some people in and get ready to keep rolling.
It's weird because it doesn't feel like Penn State is starting that much all over again, because I think we maybe just did this whole process not that long ago. But I think the NIL thing has really bothered me more and more. And I think as I did some of the research and looking at the NIL, which mainly is Success with Honor, that's the cornerstone NIL at Penn State, and realizing how much schools like Michigan and Ohio State and even Notre Dame were just lapping around Penn State on the competition, it comes very clear that this is a problem and it needs to be fixed. And I think you had said it earlier on last week's episode, Pat Kraft's number one responsibility will be figuring out NIL, and number two will be, what he does with the basketball coach. When it's probably all said and done, looking back at his career. And apparently he's not been doing, at least in my opinion, a good enough job, because I really think that I don't think the average Penn Stater, and that's the way I try to approach this podcast, the blog, any conversation that we have, you and I are relatively up here. We are in the upper tier of Penn Staters. We go to a lot of games. We know Penn Stater people. The average Penn State fan, when it comes down to it, goes to at most 1 or 2 Penn State football games a year, tunes into big Penn State basketball games because that's what everybody else is talking about on social media, at least in my opinion. And I don't know if that average Penn Stater knows what the NIL collective is called. I don't know if they know what it is and what it does and why it's important. And I think educating the next generation or that subset is probably the most important issue that Penn State is facing. And not all of that relies on Kraft. I think some of that also relies on the NIL. And I think that was what Mike Motti's tweets were about, was kind of pretty harshly at Jay Paterno, and I agreed with everything that he said.
Yeah, I'm sure there are people who are much more invested in games and stuff than I am, and know some stuff more about NIL certainly than I do. But I think one of the things with NIL that strikes me is there's a Penn State, and it makes sense, there's a Penn State mentality for Success with Honor, right? Like, we're going to do this the right way. We're going to make sure kids are whatever. We're going to do. I'm not sure the people you're competing against with NIL stuff are concerned about that. They know it's pay for play, just under a different name. And I think if you're going to go about it and try to say, hey, we're going to make sure everybody has a little something, we're going to do whatever, we're going to do all the sports, I'm not sure that's the approach that helps you win in football and basketball consistently, or gives them the support they think they might need to compete with whatever. Football, I doubt. Football probably gets what they want. Basketball may not. And I think that's part of what you're hearing in the past week or so with the back and forth. I think the sooner we get to, in the next 4 or 5 years, calling all this NIL stuff what it is, pay for play, and setting salary cap, setting a salary floor. This is what a point guard's worth in the Big Ten. The sooner we get there, the better it's going to be. Because until then, this is just now the legalized extra handshakes that they talked about in the 60s and 70s. And we're saying they're doing community service, and the players are grumbling about doing community service. It just needs to be better. Mm-hmm. And better here probably means knowing we straight up need to raise money to pay the extra stuff that's the going rate in this business now. And for me, that's a little distasteful in my age group of that, right? Like, can chart off all the things they're getting, but that's what the rules are now.
I agree. I hadn't thought about that way until tonight, until you just said that. Now that you said that just really clicked in my head. So I 100% agree with that. I wanted to add, that was going to be my next question to you. And part of this podcast is our age difference. And I guess my question would be, do you feel like it is closer to your generation that doesn't get this, and that maybe my generation does? I don't
think it's not get it. It's just whether or not you want to support it, right?
Yeah, I think that's fair. No,
I mean, I get it. Fair. I get it, but I just don't know that. There's a part of me, again, that I've said before, hey, I'll take 7 and 5, halfway decent every 4 years when we get the right mix, right? And I'm okay with that, because in my world, there's other things that need me to donate money to more than the college athlete that I know is already getting a scholarship, the biggest stipend in the Big Ten and all kinds of freebies, and may or may not be going to class, right? Like, you know, but I do think that's generational in some ways. I mean, I think if you're going to win, do it and win. I think the younger fans probably think that way. I think my brother, who's 6 years younger than me, would be like, shut up and spend some money, right? Like, do that.
I guess where I approach it is like very much your generation and above has the money in the Penn State ecosystem. There are not a ton of as wealthy as your generation's Penn Staters at my age bracket, because most of us are still paying off the cost to go to Penn State. So I don't know. I was curious to hear your perspective on that, because I think in my eyes, that's in my opinion, not that I think you're one of these people, because you do get it. I think there are more people your age that don't get it, that don't understand why this is so important and why this is a bigger issue than just this basketball thing. This is a bigger issue because if this is an issue with basketball, my God, what's happening with football? And that's just going to have a trickle down effect on everything. Right. Whether it's, and it's not just going to have a trickle down effect on like the programs themselves, it's going to have a trickle down on attendance and how many season tickets are being sold. And obviously, like if Penn State's not good and they're not competing, then there's going to be problems. And I think that's just going to impact everybody. And then those people are also going to be the first ones to grumble, even though they can afford the,
right. I mean, there's people with a lot more disposable income than me to be able to support that. And I think they maybe need to athletics may need to make that case, or Success with Honor may need to make that case to them about why it needs to be there somewhere else. But for me, it's probably more just a sports and non-sports thing. Like if I have that revenue, it's probably going the United way before it goes to the college athlete, just because, right? But I get it.
I think is fair for someone in your financial situation, our like collective financial situation. We do not have, I don't think you have millions upon millions of dollars, unless you're hiding something from me, Steve.
Let's be clear. That's right. That's even tens of hundreds of whatever. So yes.
But those types of people can afford that type of I can kick $1 million here and $1 million the United way and $1 million. And if you like the job needs to be better, more well done on obviously I'm not like saying like don't donate to the United Way, because I want you to donate to Penn State sports, but I think there could be a better job of tapping into those types of networks, and maybe they're happening, but I don't know. I just don't buy the whole like Penn Staters are poor thing, or there's not a big time donor.
No, I think it's
there are Penn Staters that have a lot of money.
Right. I think it's more for the older ones. It's probably just more the mentality, right? Penn State was always, not that the football team program was poor, that Coach Turner was underpaid or not paid, but it was always a less is more. Like, we'll do with what we got. We're not going to overspend. I mean, if you look at the backside of football, there was stuff they weren't doing, obviously, in terms of recruiting and analytics and just structure stuff. They just made do with what they had. And not that they were by any means poor, but it wasn't like they were cutting edge with stuff. And I think that's kind of the sons and daughters of Pennsylvania, happy to have the education kind of thing that some of those older folks are. But I mean, I think that's going to change. I think it's going to turn. The challenge is, with the little Twitter spat, is it's kind of Penn State on Penn State crime, which is just never good, right? Doesn't look good if you all aren't rowing the boat in the same direction.
It was funny because I think I read, well, I didn't think I read it. Earlier today, I read that those tweets have now been deleted. And the Mike Monty tweets at Jay they were like, that's my linebacker. Like that, like, right. And God bless Michael Monty, who came to Penn State to just play football. And now he is basically like the flag carrier through the scandal, the flag carrier now into this NIL stuff. We're asking a lot of him, but I don't know. I wonder personally, like, we're not privy to these conversations. I would love to be a fly on the wall, because I guarantee there have been some nasty emails sent and some nasty phone calls over the last week. So I don't know. I'm fine with them having their little beef or whatever you want to call it. I think Jay was probably smart in not responding, but I also kind of thought the comment from Jay was a little bit out of nowhere. Like, I don't know. I think there were better ways to go handle it, and I think there are bigger problems, as I pointed out, like with the NIL specifically. And I guess one of the other questions I have, and then we'll shut up and move on, and we'll get to hockey, and then Rob. But I guess with NIL, like, have you donated to it?
NIL stuff? No.
Yeah. Okay. I've only donated a very small amount, but I have,
Mhm.
just to say that, because I wanted to see what it was like. If you were going to donate, would you donate to a specific team, or do you just want it to go all into a bucket? Like, because I think that was like, amongst my friends, that was a point of contention in this whole, like, we're all on the same page about the NIL screwed, and this needs to get figured out. But like, amongst our group, it's like, why would I donate to basketball when they haven't really done that much to me? Like,
No, that's
going
fair.
back,
I would do a specific sport rather than a bucket. And honest, I'd be swayed. Like I have a kid in the class now who's a member of the women's soccer team who is just grounded, smart, balancing her stuff, getting me homework from a camp that's held off campus during the semester that I don't have normal kids doing that. I'm impressed by that, right? Like, and that's worth my support more than some other stuff where they may just be jocks that are there to wear my school's uniform for a couple of seasons and go on to the next thing. I'd like you to invest and want to be at the place as much as I wanted to be at the place. So I'd probably be biased by that.
okay. I was just curious. I think, again, going back to my point of, like, when I donated, I think I donated to, I split it. I split it to football and hockey. But what I was going to say is, like, with my generation, like, goes back to that point of, okay, like, again, these are the problems you're having at basketball. What kind of problems are you having with football? And football is really what people care about here. We need to get that figured out, because I think that just, like, that's keeping me up a little bit late at night type thing.
Well, and if you're a Penn State fan, you got a survey this week, probably, right? If you got tickets at any time,
Yeah,
there's a survey out this week that asks a bunch of these questions. It's a long survey, so get a drink when you sit down with it.
I haven't done it yet. Okay,
But it
that's good to
asks
know.
about sponsors and do you recognize who certain sponsors are? And would you be swayed by a sponsor being promoted by a student athlete? And would a student athlete promoting be more or less likely for you to buy? And do you support NIL? Like, all this stuff is in there, so you get a chance to be heard. But it's long. Take some snacks.
Okay. That's all I've got about NIL. Anything going once, going twice?
No, we'll get a chance to beat it up again.
Okay, yeah,
I'm sure.
I'm sure. Okay, real quickly, and we have to talk about Penn State hockey. There were people texting me, "Are we going to Tampa? Are we going to Tampa? When are we going to Tampa?" I'm talking to one of them right now.
Hope I wasn't the only one, because I felt kind of bad about that after they went behind.
No,
I'm not that kind of fan, but I was a little,
and then
over my skis there.
They're not going to Tampa. Point blank, I am very disappointed I'm not disappointed in anyone. Let me rephrase that. I am heartbroken for all of the people that put a lot of time and energy into that program behind the scenes. Dana Kraus, Brian Tripp, those types of people, because they deserve something like this. And Penn State was this close, and to see it kind of play out that way, and just, I knew that game was, like, I knew waking up Sunday morning I was going to watch Penn State play in overtime, and I knew that it probably was going to be the result of a close goal at the end of late in the third period, or it was going to end in a heartbreak. And I don't know, maybe that's just the Penn State hockey fan in me. But I just, they're going to get to the Frozen Four. It is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And I think we're starting to see that. I think Guy has finally started to figure out the roster, has started to figure out the key pieces. Maybe is shooting the puck just a little bit less than normal. And I think that's resulting into a year like this. And credit to that team. I mean, that team was playing like crap for 3 months now, really.
It's January.
And came out on Friday night, and my God, they looked amazing. And then really, they were Luke Hughes blocking that shot late in the third period away from going to the Frozen Four. That's really all it came down to, I think.
Yeah, I mean, probably could have given up one less power play, right? And that would have been helpful.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think they've the second game, the regional final out Sunday night felt like an infomercial in some ways for Penn State hockey, which is always a good thing, right? Just in terms of getting some people and getting in there. They were winning games and in close games in the second half of the season, even though their record wasn't great, playing in a way that wasn't Penn State hockey. I mean, they weren't shooting as much, not they weren't shooting as much, but they didn't have to, they were winning with some defense. They were playing well in the defensive end at times. They're an older group of guys always because of what hockey is, right? So they're generally a good program that represents the university well. Their charitable stuff this year was really cool. The event they put together with the sled hockey team. Yeah, I think they're going to get to the Frozen Four at some point. They started the season unranked, picked fifth in the Big Ten, and they were a couple minutes away from going to the Frozen Four. When it got tied, I'm like, oh well, this was fun, right? Because you just kind of knew, and then went to overtime, like,
Yeah, everyone had that collective.
And I appreciate the challenge for the too many men on the ice at the end, right? You got to, right? You got to, if you think it's close, you got to, because what if they call it and you get the goal waved off?
Yeah.
So I get that. They were a fun watch in this, especially the last game and in the regional, just because they were playing in a way they hadn't played most of the second half of the season.
Yeah.
I think that break really did them a service. So yeah, I think you have overall reason to be happy. I think it was good for them to finish strong and play well. And, it's not horrible to lose that Michigan team, which could end up, playing for the national championship and maybe even winning it.
Yeah.
And Brian Tripp is going to the Frozen Four.
Oh, that's true. He is going. Well,
So
but it's a little bit, but I don't know. I like I said, I think I maybe have been a little thin patient lately on Penn State hockey, but I think a weekend like this weekend really reset that patience.
I was curious about that for you, right? Because you were like, no, they should be in the Frozen Four at the start of the season, right? You were talking, they should be. This is my expectation, and when they didn't get there, but I think they played well enough to say, hey, okay, this was good hockey.
Yeah, I think they exceeded my expectations for the year. Although I think a Frozen Four is still the goal for this program, realistically, and I think I want to see this program. I guess, I don't know, maybe I'm just so thin patient by what football has presented to us, but I want to see them get over the hump, mainly because it's now next year is year 10 of Pagula being open. Right. And I think maybe as somebody was very tied into Penn State hockey and really tied into the hockey region in the center part / the entire state, personally for me, the expectation was they were getting this new arena and this was going to be, they're going to start winning national championships tomorrow. And I made that might not be realistic, might not have been realistic, but I think they aren't going downward. The trajectory is still going upward. Hopefully we see it.
And I, in terms of the age of the program, I mean, as young as it is, and you can make the argument, certainly the last couple of years, better than Wisconsin,
Yeah.
Better than Ohio State, maybe better than Notre Dame. That's pretty good company for being as young as it is in the program.
Well, and the other thing I've said this time and time again, there are 2 Penn State programs, maybe 3, that absolutely got derailed by COVID. The first one being Penn State men's lacrosse. I think that one got probably the shortest end of the stick. And then Penn State football, but I think ultimately Penn State hockey. That team, that 2020 team was probably going to the Frozen Four, right? And probably making some bigger waves.
Would have been fun to watch them do it too. Yeah.
I just think I'm bummed because I don't get to go to Tampa again, Steve. And let me explain to you. I cannot explain to you how great of a joy it is to walk into that arena wearing shorts and a hockey jersey. It is just an incredible feeling. And plus now I don't get to drink Cigar City. Well, I mean, I could go buy Cigar City, but it's not the same as drinking it there. So
it feels like a first world problem, but okay.
Yeah, I know. I'm just upset. All right. Speaking of Tampa, which was going to Bradenton, the main reason we're having this podcast tonight is we have Rob Biertempfel from The Athletic joining the show. We chatted about a lot of things, some of it about the Pirates, but not necessarily the X's and O's, more so about being a baseball reporter and covering all of that stuff. It's a great listen. Not just saying that because we recorded that podcast. It's a very interesting listen if you've never really it's a very good listen in the sense that it gives you an insight on what it's like to be a baseball reporter, but also gives you the insight of this is where the Pirates are at and somebody that knows this team a little bit better on what could change. So go ahead, take a listen to that, and we'll be back after this. Steve, it is spring, and we have a spring-related guest, I would say, on the podcast today. Rob Biertempfel of The Athletic joins us, Pittsburgh Pirates beat writer. One of my favorite Twitter follows, I'd have to say. Maybe mainly because he tweets about the Pirates and understands the misery that Pirates fans go through, even if he covers the team. Rob, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm kind of settling in for. I just got back from spring training very late last night. So I'm in those couple of limbo days between the end of spring training and the start of the regular season, which means I'm doing preview stories and stuff, and then it's off for a whole bunch of probably a whole bunch of misery, but maybe some good baseball thrown in as well for the next 5 or 6 months.
I love this. This is why I subscribe to The Athletic. This is great. You are also happen to be a very proud Penn Stater. I know that for a fact as well. So we'll hit on that. I guess for those that maybe don't know you, that don't suffer through Pirates baseball, who are you? What and kind of what is your journey to The Athletic covering the Pittsburgh Pirates?
Wow. Well, I am native Pittsburgher. I grew up on the north side, which explains my accent. I am Penn State class of '87, former Collegionaire, along with Steve and probably everybody else who was calm at Penn State. Back then, it wasn't school communications, wasn't college communications. It was just barely a journalism department. So a lot of what I learned, I credit the Collegian in some instances, even more than what I learned in classes, because that was hands-on, real world, get out there and get dirty experience. After that, went to DC for about 8 years, worked for tiny little newspapers in Maryland, and came back to Pittsburgh in '94. Got a job at the Tribune Review in Pittsburgh, didn't really have an assignment, and I was going up to Penn State for the weekend. The Knicks were playing Southern Cal that weekend. And my boss said, "Hey, do you want to cover the game while you're up there?" Sure. So I ended up covering the 1994 Penn State team that should have won the national championship, but instead it went to Nebraska. But that was the first Rose Bowl trip and everything. Covered the team for about a decade or so. And now I've been full-time with baseball for a while. Started at The Athletic. They called me out of the blue about 5 years ago and said, "Hey, you want to jump ship?" And I was thinking it probably would be a good time to give it a try. So now here I am starting, I don't know, how many years have I been doing baseball? I guess I was the backup guy since '94. So 30 freaking years of baseball, a lot of it bad. And here I am.
Well, I have news for you, Rob. I will be turning 30 next year. And so I have experienced every single one of those god awful years. Let me ask you a question. There's two questions there. Number one, why baseball? Why did you make the jump to baseball? Because I feel like a lot of the times, most of the beat writers we talk to, it's football and it stays football forever. And baseball's works a lot harder of a schedule, I think.
Well, when I started writing at the Collegian, I really didn't even know if I wanted to be a sports writer or whatever. I just knew I wanted to write, and they had openings on sports. And so I said, all right, I went from candidate to sports writer, and then really liked it because, it's kind of cool. I mean, especially, when you're covering, that 90, my senior year at Penn State was '86 season, which, pretty good season. They went undefeated, won the national championship. I came down with mono and couldn't go to the Fiesta Bowl, which was brutal. Yeah. But, so I went out with the national championship, and then I started covering it at the Trib, and they didn't lose a game that season. So really, for the first 2.5 years I covered Penn State football, I never covered a loss, which was pretty wild. But then I went into the real world, and, at the little papers, I did everything. I took photos. I was the editor. I was the copy editor. I was pagination, and I wrote and I did columns, and it was all high schools and JUCOs with just a smattering of some Maryland football and some every now and then some Orioles or whatnot, but it was mostly amateur level stuff. Got to the Trib, and I had always liked baseball, and this was coming right off the time when the Pirates were really good, 90, 91, 92, with Barry Bonds and Bonilla and Dreybeck and Van Slyke and that whole crew. So for me, when you cover baseball, I mean, you really it's like being a decathlete in a lot of ways, because you cover the games. Yeah. And there's a whole bunch of them, 162 odd games. But in addition to that, you got to know every level of the minor league system and the prospects and how they're doing and who's hurt and who's coming up and how that might fill out at each level of the minors and how that's going to affect the majors. You have to understand the finances of it, the contracts, the stuff that goes into owning a franchise and running a stadium. You have to know a little bit about medicine, just to understand injuries and how that whole thing works and how guys are hurt and how they get hurt and how that affects them. And now you got to know there's a lot of math, and they promised me there would be no math, but there's a lot of math involved and a lot of physics. And that's kind of cool. And you write features and you write game stories and you write analysis pieces, and you're talking with players and coaches and managers and agents and families and minor leaguers, and in some cases, even high schoolers or college guys who might someday be drafted. So there's a whole lot of stuff. And I kind of thought, if you can do that, you can do frickin' anything in this business. For me, that was my Everest. Can I do all of that and do it well enough that they don't run me out of town after a couple of seasons? And so once I got into it, I mean, it's exhausting and it's at times mind-numbing, and there's a lot of standing around and waiting and a lot of minutia that goes into it. Who has a blister on his finger? Whose ankle is sore? Oh no, who's going to be the eighth guy in the bullpen? But there's just a lot of balls you got to keep in the air, juggling at the same time. And once you get into it, it's fascinating and all-consuming, and I love it.
Did you know all of that was part of it when you in baseball year 2 of covering it for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did you know all that stuff was part of it? Or when did you realize how much was involved in it and you had to be a decathlete?
Yeah, I kind of knew right away. I mean, my first couple of seasons covering ball at the Trib, I was the backup for Joe Rutter, who was the main beat guy. And at that point, the Trib really had just expanded and was really covering the team on a daily basis. I mean, but I think, for a number of reasons before that, they didn't cover road games or stuff like that. But at this point, they had expanded to wall-to-wall coverage. And so I saw what Joe was doing every day. And being the backup guy, I just basically filled in on a few road trips. I ended up doing maybe like 60 to 80 games a year. So I kind of had a taste of it, but I didn't have the full bore responsibility for a lot of it. And that was kind of cool. So I was able to kind of ease into it a little bit. And then, usually by the time the Pirates were really, really out of it there, as the summer waned, that would be when college football would pick up, and I would just say, sorry, Joe, got to leave, and leave him to finish out the season. So I knew it was there, but it's not until you get, knee to hip deep in it and really start thinking about it, and you're building contacts, not just for this season or next season, but in some cases for 5 or 10 years down the line. That's all, when that comes together like that, that's really the neat part of it.
Yeah, because it's the contacts for me. I mean, you can tell the difference between the people who've been there a while, or just how much easier it is for you to know who to call right off the bat, as opposed to somebody else wondering, well, shit, who should I call? Or waiting the next day to see who beat them with whoever it was they called.
Yeah. And there's stuff like, just the other day, I wrote something in a story, something about spring training. And everybody knows that you kind of look at spring training with arm's length. You don't really, the numbers aren't indicative necessarily of what a guy's ability is, because they're working on stuff or trying stuff out, or maybe there's a guy that hit 360 or whatever in spring training this year for the Pirates, but we look at the pitchers he faced, a lot of them were double A caliber kind of guys, And I was able to think back when I was writing a story to something, to an example with AJ Burnett in a game, 10 years ago. I remember one time in spring training, he was working on something and he wasn't going to throw any curveballs. He was just working on the fastball. And that game, they just lit him up on his fastball and he like stomped off the mound. And like, you could just kind of see it in his face because you know AJ, he's a little bit of a fiery guy. Walked up back on the hill and boom, 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 3 curveballs into the inning. And came off the mound, after the game. I said, I thought you weren't going to work on the curveball. He goes, enough of that. I don't know if I can get away. Enough of that crap. I just wanted to get out of that darn inning. So you think of something like that where, I was able to use it here a decade later. Just having that kind of experience behind you really pays off.
Yeah, it just seems like that experience. Go ahead, Darren. Sorry.
Mm-hmm. You're good. I feel like I had 2 summers where I covered the curve in Altoona with Corey Geiger, and I learned a lot. And I think the thing that I learned the most there is the establishment of relationships and how those can really grow. Does that make your job easier, or does that make your job harder when you have to, like, especially with a guy like, let's take AJ Burnett, perfect example, fiery guy, fiery personality, might have to write something tough about him, and I found it was harder in baseball. I don't know if you feel that way.
Yeah, no, it is. It can be difficult. I think there are a lot of guys that understand what we do, or that sometimes they're going to pitch like crap, and we're going to have to write about it. And there are guys that understand that I never pitched. Like, for example, I never pitched. So I really don't understand the whole physics, the mechanics of pitching. So I let guys know that. And I find that when I do that, they're usually more open. I say, talk to me like I'm a 3-year-old about pitching, and it works out. And then the other day I was talking with a pitcher and he was telling me how he was putting something new in his arsenal, but he kind of did it on his own at first. And he wanted to see how it worked. And then he'd go to the pitching coach and say, hey, let's keep this, that you think this will work. So he's telling me all this, and then I go out and I'm saying, wow, that's something I could do for another day. That's a decent story idea. And then he comes back to me later and says, hey, all that stuff I told you, could you just not write that right now? Because, I really haven't met with them yet. And I don't want them to read something in the paper. Well, he said the paper, but online tomorrow, and be like, where the hell is this coming from? So I'm like, yeah, it was great that he understood how I was going to write that because it was interesting. But I also understood that I didn't want to burn that bridge and get him in trouble potentially with the pitching coach and the manager. So I said, yeah, just, let's see how this goes. I'll circle back in a week or 2. If it's worked out, if it's in your arsenal, then great, I'll write about it. If not, that's just something that, he taught me a little bit about the game and how it works. And I'll, somewhere down the line, that'll pay off for me.
Kind of shifting away from that a little bit, with going back to kind of how long baseball season is. I have 2 line of questions that I'd like to ask. The first is, how do you stay engaged, and how do you make sure that the audience stays engaged with your stuff?
Excellent questions, and it can be difficult. I'm not going to lie, especially for a team that, like these last 2 years, lurching toward 100 lost seasons, and having done this now, for 30 years, I've written, there's a lot of times I've written this story before. I've written this story 4 times before about the guy that the Pirates bring in, and this is going to be the guy. He's going to be the guy. This is going to be the prospect that changes everything. Whether it's Jermaine Allensworth or Chris Benson, or, you can just go back. And I've written these stories a million times. And the challenge is finding a new, a better, a more entertaining, a more nuanced, a more analytical, whatever it's going to be, some different way of writing it and presenting it. And that way I keep myself engaged and hopefully the people that are reading it, if there are people who remember that story that I wrote 20 years ago, they can say, hey, this one's a little bit different and maybe better or maybe more entertaining or whatever. And that'd be great. Keeping fans engaged, boy, that's the secret sauce, and everybody is looking for it, whether you're at the New York Times, the Athletic, the Philly Inquirer, Penn Live, doesn't matter. Everybody wants to know. Everybody looks at their engagement numbers. Everybody looks at, in my case, I can see how many subscriptions my stories generate to The Athletic. You can look at it, see how many comments you get. We can gauge how far down in the story somebody reads, and that'll affect, maybe the length of the story sometimes. So many things go into it, and nobody really has that formula. Everybody's been talking about it forever. And there's been, Steve, you saw some of this at the Trib too. There would be, we'd pivot to video, and everybody started putting little videos in their stories. And then we realized nobody's watching these little videos. They're just annoying. They pop up in your story, and that's when people close the story online, is when that video pops up in the middle of it. Or so you would pivot to audio interviews, or put in charts and graphs, or all these different things. At the end of the day, I think, is it a good yarn? Is it a good story? Is it interesting? Is it going to spark an emotion in you? Is it going to make you think? And those stories are tough, and they're few and far between. But when you get one, or when you get a big scoop, it's better than sex, man. And that's what gets people involved, and it gets them reading, and it gets them to come back.
You can see subscriptions your stories generate. Like the other things you rattled off make sense. So how do those dots connect in terms of the analytics?
And I'm not wise enough really to know, because I know it at the Athletic and at the Trib, and I'm assuming other outlets as well. They tweak their mechanics of gauging all that, and what goes into the formula for that. So I really, I don't know. I think it all depends upon what they think, because they can weigh it with what they think is important at the time, whether it's just simple page views. And then is it a page view by a subscriber, or a page view by somebody who came in through a link off Twitter who doesn't have a subscription yet? There's just so many different variables. And, it's difficult sometimes, because you want to serve all those audiences, all those, you want to engage all those different ways. But it's very rare to come up with a story that's going to do boom, 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 boom. Usually if you can hit one or two or three of those key areas, you're doing well. You're never going to hit all the facets at once in one story.
Yeah, that makes sense. What have you had stories you thought that were going to hit and resonate and didn't, or other ones that you thought, oh God, I'm just getting this damn thing out, and next thing you know, people love it?
There was a story I did. It ran on New Year's Day this year, and it was like I was on vacation through half of December, and I sent an email to Jim Bowden, who's former general manager at different places, and he now writes for us. And he's he's a former GM, so he has a good sense of what's going on. Still knows everybody in the industry. And that's one thing you'll find, that when you cover ball, or when you're around baseball, it is just a very, it never changes. It might expand a little bit, but there's always that core group of people you will always come across. So Jim knows everybody, and that's fantastic. So I said to him, hey, let's throw out some potential Brian Reynolds trades. And I'll say, I'll ask the readers, who would you want to get if your team traded for Brian Reynolds? And I'll give you 10 of these ideas from the readers. You break them down. I give a little bit of background on it as well. And boom, it's a story. We'll run it on New Year's Day. People just want to read something that they can just kind of, sit back and with all the clutter and leftover food and unwrapped papers, just read something. So we did that. And I made sure that the first three items in the story, I think it was three, were all related to the New York Yankees. And so that went into the headline as well. And that story, it just was a bomb. It was the most read story in our vertical, in the MLB vertical on The Athletic, for like 3 or 4 days. Generated a bunch of subs, and just got a massive, and here it was, I was just thinking, I'm just like, this is like a little mental gymnastics, just kind of say here what kind of trade might work and what kind of players are involved. And we weren't running on, saying this is going to happen. These guys we know have been, we're kind of saying, yeah, we know there's interest, and we know this is what the Pirates are looking for. So, it's like to a degree educated guessing, and it was also some old fashioned analytics, and Jim called some GMs and I called some people I know. And between the two of us, we came up with a pretty decent little story. But I decided it'd be kind of a throwaway, here we are starting a new year kind of story.
Yeah.
And it really took off. And it was just a combination of, it was just the right time that, there wasn't a lot of news on that day in baseball. So this kind of like had a newsy feel to it. And again, the New York angle, through the comments section, you could hear the New York accent when you're reading it, and it's just like, whoa, yeah. So, and in my experience, Mets fans, much worse than Yankees fans, at least in terms of just because, I don't know if it's it's sort of like the Pitt thing, it's like little brother, it was the most annoying. So that's how when you talk to the Mets fans, I think they have they've had enough of the Yankees, and it shows.
I wanted to ask about Pirates fans. I think there's a self-awareness to most Pirates fans, but within the city of Pittsburgh, especially, it still feels like the Pirates, even though attendance might not be there, like people like to talk about the Pirates still. Like I think maybe it's just because there's nothing else going on and people are still waiting for football season, come June, July. But I guess for you, do you feel that sense of community that the Pirates fans maybe often have? Am I projecting that, or is there something really there? And do you think that's one of the reasons why baseball will always kind of hang around and maybe never succeed in Pittsburgh, but maybe always hang around in Pittsburgh?
It's a good question. And, I've gone back and forth about this over the years. There's a lot of different kinds of fans, baseball fans in Pittsburgh. There's a big chunk of people. One of my rules when I worked for the Trib, my personal rules was you can never write too much about Andrew McCutchen, because everybody knew who Andrew was. And any story or headline or photo that ran with a story that had Kutch in it was going to get read. People were going to react to it. They may not even follow baseball. Oh, they know Kutch. Kutch. He just, he has that it factor. But if I write a story about, somebody, the third baseman at the time, or somebody that nobody knows, there's a sliver of hardcore fans. There's a sliver of people who dress up like actual pirates and go to games. There's a decent group of people who have season tickets or just are pretty interested in baseball. And then there's a huge chunk of people who, are we going to Kennywood tonight, or we can go to the Pirates game? Well, I'll go to Pirates game. And, it's probably like that in other cities as well. There's a big swath of casual fans. I'm interested now watching baseball kind of wrestle for the soul of the people who are the casual fans. And they're doing that by changing the rules. And I think it's honking off people who are the more diehard, old-timey kind of fans. But it's also winning over some of the people, like, the let the kids play thing. A lot of people like that. And I think it's good because it puts some life in what can be a slow-moving game. But they put in a lot of rule changes now, the shift, the pitch clock, the replay, blah, blah, blah. And it is going to speed up the game. Because we saw it. I mean, I remember, last year I'd go to cover a game in Altoona where they had the pitch clock and anything. I'd be walking out of there before the sun went down. And it was, I want to hug John Moses, the PR guy. Just, thank you for getting me out of here, man. Meanwhile, in Pittsburgh, they're still slogging along in the fifth inning, So the rule changes in that is going to speed up the game, but it's also, I remember years ago, my wife and I took our daughters to a game, and there was a replay review, and there was a challenge in the replay review. And my older daughter, Julia, was like, "What are they doing?" And my wife, Denise, was in the kitchen there, was like, "Yeah, what's going on?" And I was explaining, well, you get a replay challenge, and you get to review it, and they have this amount of time, and they got to do this, and I could tell my daughter's attention span was just like, yeah, whatever, Dad. I'm going to go back to whatever I was doing, eating a peanut or whatever. And I think you risk that losing the game by changing it, at its core. you risk making it something different, and it might be faster, it might be quicker paced or whatever, but it's going to just feel like, you got to know now, okay, well, so where can the outfielder can't stand here, and the infielder can't go past this line, and now if we have a review, and if the batter comes out of the box, or the batter has 7 seconds, I don't even know all these things, like how long the batter has to be engaged with the pitcher if the pitcher's ready to go, where it's a called strike, or people don't want to sit there and have a rule book to memorize. They know what baseball is. They just want to see baseball. And I think if you get too funky with it, you're going to marginalize your audience. And, people like football. Why? Because you got a few seconds of, ultra violence going on, and then there's a break, and then everybody goes out and does it again and just smacks somebody as hard as they can. What happens when the NFL changes the rules, and if you breathe on a quarterback, it's a 15-yard penalty, whatever, people start to disengage a little bit. I think you're going to see that in baseball. I think baseball has to be careful that it doesn't drift too far from what it has always been. And, maybe I'm old man shouting at cloud here, but, the version of the game in 1915 isn't all that much different than what it is now. But if you really start to mess with that at its core, significantly, irrevocably, it's a different game.
That is actually one of the more interesting takes I have heard on the pitch clock and all of those changes that are coming to the game. So that was interesting. Steve and I have actually we've discussed rule changes a little bit. That's part of our shtick every week, as we discuss those types of things. Do you think for a team like the Pirates that those roles benefit the casual fan more often, or do you think it's more people are still going to go to the baseball game because it's a great ballpark and it's something to do instead of going to Kennywood for the 20th time?
Well, it's interesting. The other day I talked to Travis Williams, who's the team president, and it was the first time Travis met with all the beat guys. It's the first time he had met with us in 2 years. And he's the president of the team. The guy who had the gig before him was Frank Coonley, who worked for MLB as basically their labor attorney, their shark. He would go into arbitration meetings and just hammer down the player and the agent and win those cases for the teams. A very sharp guy, opinionated guy, knew the nuts and bolts of baseball. Travis worked for the Penguins, played basketball. I'm pretty sure he grew up in Indiana. Knows baseball, likes baseball, not a baseball guy. I mean, there's just whether it's a mood or an attitude, whatever. And he talked for the half hour that he and I sat there and talked. We talked about cashless, kiosks to get food. He talked about the entrance having security at the gates being quicker, you can walk through. He talked about putting little posters and whatnot, banners about the team's history around the concourse. Talked about the different food and vendor items and whatnot. And I was like, what about the game? What about the ball game? What about the pitching and hitting part of it? And he's like, well, yeah, he's in charge of baseball operations, but he's like, really, I got the sense his gig is fan experience. He said you can basically, I'm going to paraphrase him, and I'm going to have the exact quote. It was like, you can overcome a bad outcome on the field with a good fan experience. I was like, ooh, yeah. I mean, the baseball purist in me was like, no, you win the game. That's why you play the game. You don't play to have a good season and be entertaining necessarily. You want to do that, of course, but you want to win the freaking World Series. If you don't, in my view, if you don't win the World Series, well, then your season was kind of a failure. Maybe you won a bunch of games, maybe you finished second, maybe you won a wild card berth or whatever. If you don't win a World Series, well, try again next year. And every owner knows this when they buy a team, when they run a team. They know what the economics of the game are. They know how things are structured. And it comes down to that owner, what do you want to do? do you run it like a business where you can be efficient and you can make money and not have financial problems? Like, you know, the Pirates at one point had to trade off players because they couldn't meet their payroll. Do you want to avoid that, but never, ever win? Okay. You know, it's difficult. I think I've probably veered off course from what you originally asked, but there's a lot that, again, that goes back to there's a lot that goes into this game. And some of it is the intent of ownership and management. What are they trying to do? What do they believe in their heart of hearts?
No, I was heading in that direction. So
Okay.
you're good. You're good. Do you feel, I guess, in your writing, I would say, I don't want to like put a number on it, but let's say 25% of your stories are positive, we'll call it. And then 75% are the Pittsburgh Pirates are the Pittsburgh Pirates. Do you feel that from your perspective, an ownership change would revitalize this organization, or is it more so, you know, it might just be that way forever?
I mean, well, you know, they're in a tough spot because, you know, I hate to use the term small market, but they are. I mean, look, it's Pittsburgh, but it's kind of the same size as Milwaukee or St. Louis. And those teams have done well, you know, particularly St. Louis, more so than Milwaukee, but, you know, they've done well. You can do it. You can get it done. And I think ownership now, Bob Nutting, he wants to win, but he wants to win on his terms with his plan. And that means, you know, it's a measured, cautious at times approach. Okay, that's how he chooses to run the team. And as a fan, would I like to see him, you know, go out and spend all kind of money and get all kind, you know, get superstar players? Well, sure. But can you sustain that? Probably not. So then you have you know, like we saw with the Marlins, you know, they're on the mountaintop and then they're crashing and burning a year later or whatever. You know, I think the one thing people say, why doesn't MLB run Bob Nutting out of town? MLB loves what Bob Nutting is doing. You know, when there was a stretch, I mean, and this is by no means a criticism of Kevin McClatchy, the former owner of the Pirates. He was a great guy. He sincerely wanted to win, but he didn't have good people around him, didn't have good baseball people around him, management people. And the finances were not good. And some of some of his money people began to pull out. Things got dicey. Bob came in, essentially took over control of the franchise and said, look, we're going to get that debt to equity ratio set. We're going to put ourselves in a position where we're paying off debt, where this team, you know, for the ballpark and for the improvements and whatnot. And we're going to put it on a sound financial footing. And it's going to be a little painful because we're not going to have great players. We might never have great players, you know, a ton of them coming in, but that's how we're going to do it. And we have a plan where we need a lot of planets to line up and dancing unicorns and leprechauns to fall from the sky at the same time for this team to win a World Series. That might happen at some point. But if it doesn't, we're still going to put, you know, an entertaining product out there and be financially stable. We're not going to make waves. We're not going to be an embarrassment organization or have a lot of scandals or stuff like that necessarily. So, you know, MLB is, you know, you look at the franchise and it's stable. It's not sexy, but it's stable.
Is Pittsburgh a baseball town?
People are going to hate me, but I don't think it is. No. I don't think
I mean, other places I've been, when on our honeymoon, we stopped in Baltimore last series at Memorial Stadium, and the people were just in the game more than I had seen Pirates fans at that time, right? And even now, you know, it's not like, I know it's different, but I don't feel people are going there and busting out a scorebook or worried about what's going on. They're like, oh, cool, I can see the skyline. It's a great ballpark. Gonna get a sandwich and you know, whatever. I just. No criticism. I mean, I've suffered as a fan, but I'm not as engaged as some others. But I just didn't know through 30 years of it what you thought. So
yeah, I used to think it was a good ball town, but now, yeah, you're right. I think some of it is that people have been ground down by, you know, going on now a half century without a World Series. People And there's just so many other things out there, and there's so many other distractions. Everybody brings a phone to the ball game, and I bring a phone to the ball game, and I spend time on my phone on the ball game. So there's just so much else. And it just doesn't have the same feel to me. Like when you go to St. Louis, I mean, everybody rags on Cardinals fans, best fans in baseball. But we were there last year for opening day, and it really was. I mean, I woke up, whatever it was, like, 7 a.m. or whatever. There are already people lined up waiting for that little swath of tickets they held back for opening day. Like hundreds of people lined up. Mm-hmm. And yes, I mean, the Cardinals have Molina and, Pujols and everything else. But I'm going to go to Cincinnati this week to see. They have I guess they still do. They still do the parade there for opening day. They used to, the Reds used to be the first game. Yeah. Just a different feel sometimes. And I'm not saying it's not good or bad. I mean, but it's just different than, like, if I'll go to Colorado or Arizona or Miami or Tampa, Pittsburgh better than that. But is it the Bronx? Is it Philly? No, there's people in Philly, man. They'll rip your heart out.
And be happy to do it too.
They'll sing a song to you as they do it.
How has your baseball career as covering baseball freed you up to be a Penn State fan for football? Like, has it? I mean, I'm curious if being able to get away from football and do this has changed your fandom or affected your fandom for Penn State.
Yeah, it was. It's funny the years that I covered Penn State football. It was when I first started, there was some really good years, and then, as you're aware, it got challenging. For Joe Paterno and for the people around the program and the fans and everything. And those were hard years to cover in a lot of ways. And I think I was able to kind of remove myself from being an alum to stand back and look at that program. And I admit too now, I'm a Paterno guy. I believed in what he was doing and how he was doing it. But those last few years, you look back and there were times where Joe was just openly combative with the media, and or his wife would sit there, Supa would sit in the room and be openly combative with us as well. And that was kind of hard to, that was like, hey, don't lie to me about stuff. Don't, bullshit me anymore. So it's nice now that I'm full-time baseball guy that I can just go back to being a college football fan, just out now. I don't do any coverage of college football. I don't ask to do it. I don't want any part of it. I can just sit back and watch the games, and it's been great. I mean, I remember a few years ago, I was in Denver for a series with the Pirates, and I told my wife I was getting tickets, but I guess she heard tickets and I heard myself say season tickets. There was a little disconnect there, and I was on the phone with her. I remember I'm sitting there in the food room talking to her on the phone. She says, "Hey, this thing showed up today." I think they sent you too many tickets. I was like, "Well, how many did we get?" And she says, "There's 2 for every game." I'm like, "No, that's right." So it's been nice, and it's I'm just more of a fan of the college game than the pro game in general. So for me, I mean, that's just it's great. The seasons, there's a little bit of overlap there. Sometimes it works out. Sometimes I got to miss a game. The past couple of years, it's worked out really well that I haven't. I think this year as well. The Pirates will be on the road, and I won't be traveling to those games anyway. When Penn State's at home for like the West Virginia game and a couple others at the start, so that's nice. But yeah, and for me, it's a nice way to break away from baseball, even if it's just for a Saturday in September. Just to forget about the carnage I had seen on the North Shore the night before.
That's fair. Very cool. Thank you.
That's good. All right, Rob. I'm out of questions, but I have 3 more questions. Sorry.
All right.
But they're quick ones. We do this with every guest that comes on the show that's a Penn Stater specifically. They're very quick answers. That's all we need. You are back in State College for one night and one night only. What bar are you walking into?
Shandy Gaff.
Okay. Steve is also a gaff kind of guy. Well, It's
That's
something
an old
about
guy, young
your,
guy
I was
coming
gonna
up.
say, as I say, this is your era of Penn Staters. Everyone we have from like your age range usually says the gaff. So
Okay, yeah. I mean, I could have said, well, I really didn't go to the G-Man much, and the surf club no longer exists. And then again, there's just, the G-Man for that matter. Although lately, my wife and I, we like to go to local whiskey because that's like all, 50-year-old alumni drinking expensive brown liquids. And that's fantastic. So shout out to those guys. They do a good job.
okay, cool. What was your dorm in college? Like, what was your go-to food commons at Penn State?
Well, in the day, I had no choice. I was in Snyder Hall,
Okay.
In East Halls. So I ate at Finlay Commons. And if you're going to ask, yes, Chicken Cosmos. When the day they took away the Chicken Cosmo, just a terrible, terrible day for Penn State food items.
People mark that day and the day that they switched from Coke to Pepsi is like the two worst days at Penn State.
Yeah, I mean, both of my daughters went there, and they went. Well, they just graduated within the past couple of 3 years, and so they're like, I'm still don't understand this whole thing of you can go to any dining hall you want, anytime you want. You can live off campus, go to it's fantastic. I wish they would have had that back in the day, but no, for me, Dining Hall D, Finlay Dining Hall Commons.
Okay.
A lot of fun.
And your go-to creamery ice cream flavor?
Bittersweet mint, and we're going to win this year.
I saw your tweets this morning about this.
I just voted today against my number 2. It's going to be a fantastic matchup. I want to see Bittersweet Mint and Grilled Stickies in the final. Although Whiteout, very underrated, I think, as a creamery flavor. It's just something about it. It's almost like popcorny, but it's fantastic.
The first time I had it, I was like, this is going to be weird, and it instantly became a top 3 creamery flavor for me. I think it's delicious.
It's fantastic. Yeah. So then the Stickies, that's like a no-brainer.
Yeah.
So thank God that they're still keeping that going now that the diner is. I don't even know what the diner is now, but it was a sad day when the diner went down.
Another sad day. We got all kinds of food sad days.
Yeah.
No. What the heck? So, hey, if I can get on my high horse too for just one moment on my soapbox, and for folks to listen, and I assume you're going to have like a lot of comms people listening. If you get an email from the Collegiate AIG, click on the petition, send a note to President Beneputi about restoring some of the funding for the Collegiate.
Yep.
A 50% cut is outrageous and uncalled for. It just seems to me like, for years I thought the university kind of had it out for the Collegiate. Goes back to decades ago when they banned the advertising for bars because it was unwholesome for the children, I guess, or whatever. But that crippled the Collegiate financially for a few years. These cuts will be just as bad.
Yeah. So
let her know that, let's do the right thing. And maybe, I understand cuts have to be made, but 50% is hard to swallow.
Yeah, I have some thoughts about that too as well, Rob. So I'm glad that we're on the same page there. All right. Well, thank you for your time. Is there anything that you would like to plug before you say farewell to our guests?
Get some subscriptions, yeah. Please.
We want credit for these subscriptions.
I could mention that we're running our opening day sale right now, where it's new subscribers go for $1 a month for 12 months, which is pennies a day. Insane. That's less than you spend on 1/3 of a gallon of gas. Think about it that way, which is kind of crazy. But yeah, so if you can the Athletic put my girls through college, and that's great. And now they're out there in the real world, and hopefully the Athletic will fund my wife said, yeah, we'll fund our retirement.
So you don't have to watch Pirates baseball anymore.
Exactly. Coming up fast, man.
All right. Well, hey, seriously, thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it. Be sure to check out all of Rob's stuff on the Athletic. I read pretty much everything that he puts out.
You're the one.
I'm that guy.
Exactly.
They suffer, as I would like to say. So, Steve, it's funny to me. This is now the 3rd or 4th guest that we've had on, and they say the gaff. And what is it like? Maybe it's just because I don't like the smell of cigarette smoke, and that's
Well,
fine.
he had the surf club on his list too, which is interesting to me.
Where was that at? I have never
that
heard of the
was
surf club.
the Dark Horse, right? And off of Calderway, the backside of Calderway.
Okay.
The
Okay.
surf club was and I think we talked about this before, but at least I've talked, maybe not you. Surf club was 5-cent wings. So we would go there for 5-cent wings to surf club. And
That's
then we would
incredible.
go to the gaff, right? And the gaff music, I think, is still pretty much the same.
Yeah.
So it might have been the only bar you had to go up steps to, which maybe that makes it different, right? It just feels like a different experience. I mean, it's like that all. It's like it is now, though. I mean, I guess last time I was there in a prime time was a couple of years ago. We were crawling over people, getting in the tables, sing along stuff. And a lot of the bars that way, right? It's the Penn State thing where you share an experience, right? You share some music, you share some fun, and that's all. This dispersed place comes and shares something, which is kind of the nice part about going out. So, and I don't know why it isn't that age group. Maybe there weren't as many. I mean, there was the Scorpion, which was really like heavy metal, harder kind of stuff. The brewery was kind of there.
The brewery's always there. That's
right,
still
right. So
I think that's maybe my answer to that question, but I don't know. I'd have to. It's either that or the first. Anyways, back to Rob. More importantly, fascinating that somebody that switched from football to baseball. I feel like 99% of the time you almost hear the other way because it's just like football is a lot easier to cover in terms of it not taking up, from quite literally like last month all the way till October, depending on how good your team is. But I think it was a really good insight on kind of the state of a Pirates fan and kind of how he approaches it. I think he did a nice job of explaining the not contradictions of Bob Nutting, but the thought process of Bob Nutting and maybe how that is. Yeah, he's not doing a great job for the fan, but in terms of running a business, he's actually not doing too bad. So I thought that was interesting. I think the other question that you asked, which was great, is Pittsburgh a baseball town? And he said, no, not really. Like that kind of surprised me because I think, at least in my mind, a lot of people think that Pittsburgh is still a baseball town, even over the Steelers. Like it, or maybe it switches. I don't know. I think, at least again, going back to old guys, I think amongst people in your generation, that is the biggest remember when the Pirates were good. And that's something that really we only have 3 years of experiencing in my lifetime. So that's
yeah,
why
and I
we
don't even know
have
if they were really when they were really good. If they were, and again, Three Rivers was a tough place to sell out for anything, right? So I don't know, even when they were really good, it was a baseball town. It was a football town that enjoyed some baseball success in the off season. And I wasn't there then, but kind of picking through it through the years after. No, I didn't know what he was going to say, but I was just intrigued because I haven't had somebody who'd been covering the Pirates 30 years to really ask that too. So it's interesting to hear, and in his process and stuff, I thought good stuff. So I'm glad he made time.
Hopefully we get some commission off all the subscribers that we although let's be
Our
honest,
our last athletic guest generated a subscription from a podcast listener. I do know that.
Well, all right. Well, look at that. Where was I going with that? I don't know. I am always interested to hear it because I think that's the other thing then was kind of keeping people's attention. That's got to be the most difficult job of that, or part of that job, because even I, who watches probably 40 to 50 Pirates games a year, struggle with that come even July, August, September. September, it's football season. So
You're not alone.
I thought that was interesting to hear. Anything else you want to add there?
No, sir. I'm good.
Bear with me 1 second. This week's old guy, young guy, Steve. I want to know. We're not going to get into the Wawa Sheets debate, but I want to know, if you are buying a sub, are you buying it toasted or untoasted?
Not toasted.
Not toasted. You like your hoagies cold.
Yep. Didn't even know toasted was a thing until I don't know when. Well, those were grinders, I guess. I think when I was in college, it was a grinder if it was toasted. It was a hoagie if it wasn't. I think.
This is interesting. Because to me, when I go to Wawa or Sheets or Wegmans, I want them to warm the sub up a little bit. but
I'm not a limb sub guy. No,
okay.
it's just a cold sandwich in a different shape presentation.
Okay, what is your go-to sub order? And do you like Wegman subs? Let me ask you that. Before you give me your sub.
No,
order.
CC Peppers for me used to be. They're not as open as much anymore. At least they had a COVID thing where it was like they were really with the masks till late, and I showed up once and didn't like have a mask, and I'm in the parking lot. I'm like, okay, not going in. Like so. So I don't know best sub in town. I know Jersey Mike's this week because they support Pink Zone. So I don't know when this podcast goes out, but if we get it out before Wednesday, 100% of their stuff goes to Pink Zone. So knock yourself out, or goes to Washington State College in Altoona area. Yes, Pink Zone. So maybe I still think CC Peppers for cold. Actually, Brothers Pizza, the Brothers Pizzas in Stormstown and Port Matilda make good subs, and so does the one in the Giant Plaza in North Atherton.
That was to say, I feel like in State College, Brothers Pizza is the one that I always hear the name the most. There's a place in Altoona that I don't know if it's still open. It closed for a while and then maybe reopened. It's Maccabee's Subs, and they've got this very delicious like dressing that it's really probably just like olive oil and vinegar, but it's very good. And you know what else that I think we've never really discussed this, but this is a very regional thing. Mariana's Hoagies. There's nothing like, if you want a cold hoagie, that is my, like, get me a Mariana's Hoagie or the white pizza.
Well, I'm waiting. Hopefully a listener has stuck with this late, or maybe Bev Summers knows the answer because she's the only one who's sticking with this late. Mariana's has changed from when our kids did fundraising and how the stuff was presented looked one way. Now there's another group down there. Is it Bonanza Subs or something like that? It looks like it's an offshoot of them, or like somebody who was with them before doing, and their packaging when you buy them as a fundraiser, I bought it from somebody last year, looks a lot like Mariana's used to look, like with the little packages for the shredded lettuce and the tomato. Mariana's has changed its packaging the past few years for what it does. I don't think they're any less, but any less quality. It's just different. And somebody else is using that other stuff. So down in Altoona, it looks like there's rival or two different options for your fundraising sub.
I'll investigate this. I will say the biggest game changer has been, because you could really only get the white pizza either if the park was open or if somebody was doing the fundraiser. However, now on Saturdays and Sundays and maybe Fridays, Del Grosso has like a kitchen that you can pull up to, and regardless if the park is open, you can buy your sub and hoagie. And it's delicious. So
interesting. And it's Powerhouse Subs is the rival thing in Altoona.
Okay. You know what? I have heard of this. Now that you say this, I have heard of this one. So
yeah,
I'll have to take a look at it. Okay.
Look at us. We have just pimped about every sub there is in town. So if anybody's still listening to this point, we'll be glad to do our.
We will take some sub NIL dollars.
Exactly.
And use that. Okay. Thank you to Rob for joining us. That was a great conversation. Thanks to Steve for sticking around. I know this is a longer episode for us, but if you made it to this point, thank you for listening. In the meantime, we've got a website. It's stuffsummersays.com. On that website, there is a segment or a section called With
Steve.
There we go. Steve, you have an email. You're paying attention this week. You have an email. It is what?
It's Steve at stuffsummersays.com.
There we go. My email. Darian at stuffsummersays.com. We also have a podcast email, which is just podcast at stuffsummersays.com. We have a podcast, which you just listened to. And in that podcast, when you're done listening to it, you can give it thumbs up, 5 stars, all of that. We have made some back-end decisions without telling Steve that we are now on some more net podcast networks. So I think we're on Google now, or we were on Google. I think we're on Amazon and maybe one other. Other than that, we have Twitter handles. My Twitter handle is at stuffsummersays. Steve's, yours is
at Steve Samsel.
Anything else?
Oh, thank you very much.
That's great. Good.
Talk to you next week.
Yeah. All right. Goodbye.